Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for a very important conversation and discussion this evening. Once again, for the second time, we are extremely honored to host a panel of two of the people who are most influential about the Middle East and policy. One because he's at the center of events, and one because his commentary on the Middle East is read throughout the world and influences the influencers. To my immediate left is Jason Greenblatt. As the Special Assistant to the President of the United States for International Negotiations, he serves as the Chief Middle East Negotiator for the United States of America and as the Middle East Envoy. You have all seen him in the news repeatedly, especially over the last few weeks, because of the announcement that next week the United States will be hosting an economic summit. I think they're calling it a workshop in Bahrain. We were always debating whether we should call it Bahrain or Bahrain. But that's going to be taking place next week, and Jason has been instrumental in organizing that conference. That will, of course, serve as the pretext for tonight's conversation, now that the beginning, I guess, of the Trump peace plan is so imminent. I want to extend a personal thank you to Jason, because as an extremely senior government official who is beyond busy, he has been so generous with his time. It's rare for a government official to undertake so many briefings to the public to keep them on board with what the administration is doing. And while it's rare, it's actually a very good thing. It shows transparency, it shows availability, and it shows integrity. I should finally say about my friend Jason Greenblatt that not only is he a family man and a man of high integrity, I believe he really is a feather in the cap of the President of the United States. Many people speak about a high turnaround in the White House. Jason has not only been in the administration from day one, he has been at the President's side for more than 2 decades as his attorney at the Trump Organization, and he has the President's ear. And if you get to know Jason as a person, you'll understand why. He is a very unique and special man, and I thank you for your devoted service to the United States of America, and God bless you. Thank you. More to my left, although that is not a political statement, but one of just geography, is my very dear friend, Bret Stephens. I could go on about Bret. He has asked me to keep it very short, so I will do so simply by saying Bret is universally recognized for being one of the finest writers in America today. Israel has few defenders as eloquent in the English language as Bret. That felt like a drum roll. Israel has few defenders who are as eloquent. Like Jason, Bret is a family man. He's extremely devoted to his 3 children, and Jason is devoted to his 6. But he cheated. He has triplets. So you know, 2 very devoted family men. I can personally attest to what a loyal and amazing friend Bret is. What a man of integrity and righteousness and goodness. Because he has his critics, and I have probably a lot more. I find it amazing when people speak about Bret Stephens and his convictions, when I know him to be a man of supreme conviction, who has always followed his convictions. And his convictions lead him to write the columns that he writes every single week. Whether I agree with him fully or if I don't agree with him, Bret, this is a democracy, he has the right to be wrong. But I read Bret religiously, and I'm always amazed at his capacity to articulate thought. His mastery of language is really second to none. As you well know, he's the Pulitzer-Prize winning columnist of the New York Times. He is here, as he often is at our organization, almost always, without any kind of compensation whatsoever. He does this as a public service. It's a night away from his family, and it's his sign of friendship to me and to our organization and to the values that we stand for, and we're very honored to have you, and God bless you. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to begin, and the format tonight is extremely casual. This is meant to be a conversation and a dialogue about events that affect all of our lives, affects all of America. The Middle East has a direct bearing on everywhere, let alone for many people in this room who are very pro-Israel, who are very conscious of Israel's security, and who would like to see the highest Jewish value of all, peace, translated to something actually real in the world's most turbulent region. So with that, I'm going to begin. So Jason, you've really been in the news lately. Yesterday, you spoke at the Jerusalem Post conference. You confirmed what Ambassador David Friedman said, that Israel has a right to retain West Bank settlements in Judea and Samaria. You reconfirmed that, but that's not a big departure from even the Obama administration, because even when President Obama gave his famous speech, some would say infamous speech at AIPAC, where he spoke about the Green Line, Israel returning to the Green Line, even then he spoke about land swaps. So even he acknowledged that Israel would retain some of the settlements. What's also happened recently is that you've announced this economic conference in Bahrain, which is I think next Tuesday, beginning next Tuesday?
Tuesday night, yes.
And the big news today is that Israel is not invited to that conference. And the reason given, as I understand it from the White House, is because the purpose of the conference is to be apolitical, to focus almost exclusively on economics. But we still have to get to, well, Israel has, a minister who deals with economics. Why is Israel not going to be there? The Palestinians have already announced they're boycotting the conference. Some of the other recent developments are that Israel yesterday both announced a new town, it will eventually be a town, called Ramat Trump, to thank the president for his recognition of the Golan Heights, etc. And tensions with Iran are really escalating. Amidst all of that, and the Palestinians' refusal to even attend your conference, you're forging ahead. You have been extremely articulate and powerful and persuasive, especially through your social media feed, about the need for the United States to push for peace. So let me begin by asking you, why an economic summit? Why that first? And what are its prospects for any kind of success if both the Palestinians and the Israelis are not there? You have said many times from even this chair that the one thing this administration would not do was impose a plan upon the respective parties that was not bilateral, that was not from them. But here they're not even going to be there to talk.
So I think the last comment is probably where I want to start. You're right, we have always said, I've certainly said, we're not going to impose a plan. No one can impose a plan, by the way, not the United States, not the United Nations, no matter what any country or group of countries think that they can come out with resolutions or statements against one party or the other. Nobody could force a peace plan. The parties have to want it, the parties have to be willing to compromise to achieve one. The reason we're starting with the economics first is twofold. One, this is a very detailed peace vision. You cannot have a successful peace agreement without a successful economic plan, which means we're worried about the day after, the weeks after, the months after, and the years after. We don't want to set up a political plan only to find out that it fails and we would put the region into a worse position than the position that it is in now. We could do it all at once, but if we did it all at once, it would be a great deal of information for people to digest, and we felt the best thing to do would start with the economics, let the Palestinians understand, and by the way, there's some benefits for Jordan and Egypt as well, let the region understand the many great things that can happen for the Palestinian people from this economic plan if we also achieve a political plan, a political agreement, if you will. The Palestinian Authority, in particular Saad Erekat, has been out there decrying what we're trying to do. He is telling everybody that we're only trying to create economic peace, that we're trying to buy the Palestinians off. Completely untrue. Every time we speak about it, we explain there are two parts to the plan.
I just want to make sure. Can everyone hear Jason?
No.
Sorry, the feedback was... Okay, so it's better?
Yeah.
The Palestinian leadership is decrying the plan. They're explaining or claiming that we're trying to buy the Palestinians off. Nothing could be further from the truth. But we've split the two pieces apart intentionally. In a perfect world, we would have released the political vision shortly after the economic vision. We had an event in Israel a couple of weeks ago. They were not able to form a government. There's now new elections, and we'll have to make a decision after the Bahrain workshop as to when we will release the plan. If we decide not to release it during the election and government coalition formation, we may be kicked all the way to November. November 6th or so is the last day of the new government formation if it takes the entire period of time. That is unfortunate, but as I said yesterday at J-Post, thank God that Israel is a democracy. So I'd rather put up with that inconvenience than anything else.
Okay, before I follow up on that, Brett, would you mind if I paraphrased an email you sent me today?
No.
You would mind?
I would want.
Oh, you would mind. So, well, let me ask you, how do you feel about the announcement that neither Israel nor the Palestinians are going to be at this workshop in Bahrain next week?
Look, the fundamental problem that Israel faces is that you have a Palestinian leadership today that is unwilling or unable to come to terms with the idea of peace with its Jewish neighbor in almost any conceivable scenario. So while I think that there's a merit in having a plan that begins with an economic vision and proceeds to a political one, the predicate still isn't there, which is that neither on the side of Fatah, much less on the side of Hamas, is there any sort of willingness to participate in either of it. I mean, look, both aspects, both sides of the Palestinian leadership are participating really almost deliberately in the immiseration and impoverishment of their own people. So we're dealing with, you're offering an economic vision to turn these countries into, a Dubai, an Abu Dhabi, whatever it might be. But their vision is something completely different. And you saw that plainly with the uprising of Gazans just a couple of months ago, rebelling against a Hamas authority that is enriching itself off of the misery of their people. Who are the richest people in the West Bank? I would imagine they're the people who are connected to current centers of power within Fatah. So an economic vision isn't necessarily in their interests either. Look, what has to begin before a political plan, before an economic plan, is that the administration, and not just the Trump administration, but all Western leaders need to start speaking the truth to the Palestinian people. Number one, you will never destroy Israel, and we will never let you do it. Number two, if you want a state, prove to us that you're worthy of having a state, that a Palestinian state will be an asset in the community of civilized nations and not a liability. Number three, demonstrate in some meaningful way that you're capable of governing yourselves. So far, you're not. And number four, do not have as quasi-legitimate political authorities groups that are sworn to their neighbor's destruction and committed to terrorism as a form of political end-seeking. So all of those sort of come before the question of, what you might offer the Palestinians. If Palestinian leadership were genuinely interested in economic betterment, they would have gone for it a long time ago. There's a reason they haven't gone for it, because they see their vision of attaining power as a combination of the repression of their own people and a kind of glory seeking in the international arena, which depends on the perception that the Palestinians are the most miserable people on earth. I once spent a few instructive days in the Nile River Delta with an Egyptian friend of mine, north of the town of Mansera, basically between Cairo and Alexandria. And what was very striking to me was that the poverty that I witnessed in that area of Egypt was far deeper than any of the poverty I witnessed in Gaza on many visits to the Strip, never mind Ramallah or cities there. That told you something about what the Palestinian situation is. But the important point here is I don't think I've ever heard a Western leader simply stand up and say, listen, the Tibetans want a state, the Tamils want a state, the Kurds want a state, the Catalans want a state, the Walloons want a state, the Quebecois want a state, Texans sometimes want a state, California will become a state if Trump is reelected. So tell us, Palestinians, why we should put you at the top of the list when it comes to a consideration of statehood. What is it that you're prepared to do to demonstrate that we won't just be ushering into existence another South Sudan, another drain on the world's resources, another threat to the region's, to the neighborhood. And so far that's not there. So I wish that, with all respect, this is where I really think it has to begin, with truth-telling by leading members of the Western community.
Okay, let me jump in here. You are one of the most active people in the administration on social media, maybe second only to the president himself. And I think the most persuasive things you've been writing, actually, is how humiliating and insulting it is to the Palestinian people, who are extremely capable, very well educated, to be continually reliant on international subsidies. And you've been writing about how there has to be greater entrepreneurship, et cetera. But Bret's responses, they've shown little interest in that kind of economic development. And everyone knows Hamas has utterly abused the international aid that they've received, which per capita is higher than the Marshall Plan. Why does the administration believe, Jason, that an economic summit is the way to go, that you'll somehow entice the Palestinians to a peace agreement? And we don't know what that peace agreement is yet. Bret is alluding to a Palestinian state. We don't know we don't know what's in the peace plan. I don't even know how many people know what's in the peace plan. I'm assuming 5 or 6 people on earth know what's in this peace plan.
Do you know what's in the peace plan?
I helped write it, yes.
So let's deal with some of what Bret said. Why do you believe that an economic workshop is the way to begin?
Yeah, if you don't mind, there's a few things I want to kind of go in orders. First of all, Bret's obviously not just a great writer, but a great speaker. And there's very little that he said that I would disagree with. In fact, I'd agree with just about everything that he said. I do want to point out one thing about the difference between Gaza and the West Bank. Very few people understand just how bad Hamas is to its people, to the 2 million Palestinians there. And when people throw out terms like, this isn't you, but the traditional thinkers, two-state solution, it's so simple, if you just say that, all will be good. They don't realize that 2 million Palestinians are suffering and subject to the rule of a brutal dictatorship in Hamas, and therefore it's much more complicated than people think. As far as the order of things, we could have picked different orders. We could have released a political plan. We could have tried to get the Palestinian Authority to do all the things you said that are completely legitimate and appropriate. We didn't. One of my biggest disappointments, and I have many in this job, is that we were not even able to get the Palestinian Authority to stop paying terrorists for killing Israelis. Now, thankfully, Lindsey Graham and others helped fix that problem by passing the Taylor Force Act. But we have been pushing all the things that you're pointing out. We've not succeeded, and what we've decided to do is break apart the audience. We can keep preaching to the Palestinian Authority and go nowhere, or we can speak to the people directly. And what we're saying to the people directly, and the feedback we're getting from working Palestinians has been very positive, is here are the many things that you will be able to benefit from if we can reach a peace agreement. It's not take this money and give up your rights or your thoughts or your dreams or your aspirations, however you want to describe them. But it's if your leadership is willing to compromise and create a deal that makes sense for them, that makes sense for Israel, that keeps Israel secure, that creates a Palestinian leadership that's responsible in all the ways that you describe it, this is what's waiting for you. But if we can't, then this economic plan will not see the light of day. No one will donate or invest in a Palestinian government or Palestinian people under the current circumstances. So we chose to do it this way to reach the people, to make them understand what could be, but I have no problem admitting that it may go nowhere if we get to none of the important things that you're calling out.
Well, just to jump in here. So Jason, this is the first on-the-record conversation you're having with us here, which I greatly appreciate, and it's a week before the meeting begins, so it's appropriate. So you're saying the reason why that there is an economic summit first is to really circumvent the Palestinian leadership, to try to reach the people, because you believe that while the leadership may be obstinate, while they may be putting politics or hatred of Israel or whatever the reason for their obstinacy is, they're putting it before the interests and the needs of the people. You believe the people really want a better economic life. They want a better education for their children, better schools, better hospitals, better roads. And if you're able to show that, you can circumvent the Palestinian leadership, meaning it's not even that important that the Palestinian leadership are going to be absent from the conference, because you think this is going to trickle down to the people. How are they going to make their will known? How are they going to make it known that they want to see this happen?
First of all, we use the word workshop, not summit, and not conference intentionally. We're going to air ideas, and we're going to want feedback from the audience. It would have been great if the Palestinian leadership showed up to give feedback. Instead, they not only chose to boycott it, they chose to try to undermine it by telling everybody else not to attend or to lower the level of attendance at the event. How does that help the Palestinian people? That's terrible for the Palestinian people. We're not exactly trying to circumvent it. I would use a different way to describe it. I would say we want the people to understand what awaits them, so we want the message to get out there. We don't have a good media environment there. We can't do the same kind of interviews that we don't get the same kind of stories in the Palestinian media that we do elsewhere, because the media is a tightly controlled environment. You're right in saying I'm active on social media. One of the pieces that's missing from my social media is a description of the many, many meetings I have with Palestinians all the time, who sit in my office or in Jerusalem or anywhere else I meet them, where they explain to us that they are thirsting for those things that you described, the infrastructure and everything else, not at the expense of the things they dream about. They do want their state, meaning these Palestinians who sit with me don't say, just give me money and I'll be fine. They want a state, they talk about East Jerusalem, they talk about all the things you would expect them to say, but they are grateful that we are devoting so much time and attention to creating something that, if we're successful on the political side, they know they will benefit from tremendously. So circumvent is probably the wrong word. It's more get the word out to the people to see if it's appealing to them in the context of a peace deal.
Okay, well, that's a tall order to, whatever word we use, circumvent, go around, to have this message reach the Palestinian people and without, to the exclusion maybe of their leadership. I mean, how realistic is that, Bret? You were the youngest editor of the Jerusalem Post. You spent a lot of time in the Middle East. You write about the Middle East. You interviewed President Sisi of Egypt. Today, his predecessor, President Morsi, died, had a heart attack in a courtroom, died a few hours later. He served as president for a year. That was kind of, I guess, the will of the Egyptian people when he was elected, but he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was quickly removed. And now we don't really see the will of the people being expressed that much in the Middle East, but it sounds to me, I don't want to mischaracterize what Jason's saying, it's for Jason to express himself. But if this is to reach the people, where do we see the will of the people in the Middle East expressed in almost any way?
Other than Israel.
Other than Israel, yes.
Actually, the only functioning democracy you have in the Middle East is Iraq. Something that people rarely point out, but that's also true.
You would call Iraq a functioning democracy?
Well, it is, yeah. I mean, they have prime minister, they have a parliament, they have institutions of state. So people stop noticing but this is a whole different discussion. Look, I mean, I am with Jason in believing that there's a tremendous amount of possibility in the Palestinian people. And I certainly spent a lot of time talking to ordinary Palestinians in my own journalistic life and seeing people who wanted a better future for themselves and their families than the ones that they were likely to have. That's a tragedy for them. It has to be pointed out that the principal reason that they're not achieving that is because they have leadership that wants to deny them many of the things they aspire to, peaceful and more prosperous lives. But it's very difficult for the United States or any outside party to dictate the kind of politics that are going to emerge out of out of their societies. The Bush administration tried that with the democracy agenda, and unfortunately, one of the patterns that you see emerge in the Middle East is that in order to achieve kind of social opening, you need autocracy. And when you choose democracy, what you end up with are socially repressive political parties. That is to say, since you mentioned Mohamed Morsi, he was the result of the one free and fair election that Egypt has had in modern memory, elected a Muslim Brotherhood leader. In Turkey, at least until recently, Erdogan was the popularly elected leader. He's essentially another Muslim brother. So you have this kind of toxic dynamic in which when you choose a democratic path, you end up with socially repressive parties that are also ultimately autocratic. And if you want to achieve greater social openings, the only people who have historically been prepared to do that are people like the Shah of Iran or Ataturk, or in his own fashion, Mohammed bin Salman, all of whom have used autocratic and often despotic and brutal methods to achieve those aims. So that's a kind of a dynamic that we've seen in Middle Eastern politics for a long time. I don't know how this, or frankly any administration, breaks away from it, which is why I think it's so important to get away from trying to lay down plans or bring parties together or create workshops or whatever you want to call them, and simply to lay out consistent principles that might lead to the creation of some kind of Palestinian state, or what Benny Gantz calls an independency, at some point in the future. I really think that rhetorical footwork is every bit as important, if not more important, than sort of the behind-the-scenes diplomatic work that one administration after another, Democratic and Republican, has tried to undertake almost every single time with, frankly, dismal results. I hope yours are more successful. But the real problem is that since 1967, Western leaders have not been prepared to say the reason we want a Palestinian state if it's a state that's going to look like Costa Rica. We don't want a Palestinian state if it's going to wind up looking to us like Yemen, because we're not going to midwife into existence a new state simply to provide fresh tragedies for the people of the Middle East.
I think Bret is absolutely correct, and it ties back to an earlier comment you made about speaking the truth. We are about speaking the truth. Palestinian leadership, stop blaming Israel for all of your woes. Palestinian leadership, stop blaming the United States of America for all of your woes. We are ready, and we're not interested in just having a summit for the sake of bringing two sides together and then it goes nowhere. We are releasing a vision, and if the vision makes sense, and it will make sense, it should make sense to both sides, and you're willing to engage, then you'll engage. And if you're not willing to engage, that's fine too. But what we've done, we think, is rip off the Band-Aid of this thing, clean out the wound, try to treat what's inside. Will we be able to stitch it back in a way that the two sides will agree? We know the tall order there. But we don't think we're going to get anywhere unless we do the things that you're describing, which is both speak the truth, avoid the diplomatic big deal of getting people in a room, and lay out ideas that work, that lead to something that makes sense, that protects the security of Israel, because I don't think anyone could ever challenge the notion that Israel is not only in a dangerous neighborhood, it faces threats day in and day out, and we have to accept that, and the Palestinians have to accept that, and if they're not willing to accept it, there's not going to be a peace deal. It's very simple.
Okay, so let me just note, and Bret, you'll address this soon. I'm kind of surprised at what you're saying, Bret, because your book, of course, is famously about criticizing the retreat of the United States from international affairs, especially under President Obama. And you have always written about the importance of the United States taking a leadership role, which would seem to argue that some kind of peace initiative on the part of the United States in the Middle East is essential, as opposed to just simply laying out principles. That the United States, what I've been really, look, do I have my concerns about this peace deal? Of course I do. Israel has suffered greatly under many of these previous attempts. Having said that, obviously this is an administration that has really proven itself with regards to Israel's security, and I'm not going to go through the whole litany of lists, which we usually do, which is quite incredible, about what President Trump has done in terms of legitimizing Israel at the UN, and removing the embassy, and removing us from the Iran deal, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, I'm happy that the United States is taking the lead here, as opposed to that whole quartet thing, and the UN taking the lead. I mean, did we really want someone like Putin being an equal part? Putin is aiding and abetting a near genocide in Syria. You've been very critical of that. You've been very courageous on that, Bret. Did we really want the EU as part of this quartet who was leading negotiations, as if the EU has shown any kind of fairness to Israel? One thing that I really have appreciated, Jason, is in the efforts that you and Jared and David Friedman and Secretary Pompeo have made, is that it's an American-led initiative, which I trust a heck of a lot more than the EU or Putin or who was the other part of the quartet?
The UN.
The UN, thank you. So isn't there something to be said about the United States taking the lead here? Or do you think it
Look,
really
I mean,
backfire?
I don't think I'm saying anything antithetical to my thesis about American retreat which was written during the Obama administration. Let me make a couple of points. You know, I get tagged as a never Trump conservative. I am a sometimes Trump conservative, which is to say when he does things I agree with, I write columns which never seem to get noticed, praising the president and the administration for doing things I think are right. I think moving the embassy was 100% the right thing to do. I supported it publicly. I think getting out of the JCPOA was completely the right thing to do. I supported it publicly. I think recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights was again the right thing to do. I think these have been bold, courageous, and correct steps by the administration, and I have said so in the pages of the New York Times repeatedly. Okay.
And by the way, what you did in calling out the New York Times for what they admitted was an anti-Semitic cartoon about Netanyahu, extremely courageous. Very much appreciated.
So, you know, I'm trying to call them as I see them, and what I'm simply saying now is, I mean, okay, I'll be a little playful. I think, quite frankly, the efforts, you know, to arrange yet another deal are a little bit too much, are not disruptive enough. Let me put this that way. The way that Trump is such a, like him or not, you know, he is a disruptor, but the effort for another negotiated settlement sort of falls within the pattern of the broad tradition of American diplomacy going back to the Rogers Plan of 1969 or 7 or whatever it was. What would be really disruptive is what I'm suggesting, which is, has the president made a speech and said, these are the expectations. These are the expectations, and these are why we have these expectations. I think what really needs to change is an understanding that the issue is not boundaries. If it were an issue about boundaries, if it were an issue about territory, we would have settled this a long time ago, sometime during the Nixon administration, even maybe the Johnson administration, okay? The issue is not about economics, because if the Palestinians wanted to live in a much more prosperous way, they would have gone for leaders in the mold of Lee Kuan Yew, not Yasser Arafat, all right? Lee Kuan Yew had his issues, but, you know, he made Singapore a prosperous place. The issue here goes to fundamental choices about what a Palestinian state is supposed to be for. And the answer too many Palestinian leaders have given, current leaders, is really that a Palestinian state is supposed to be for, essentially, the destruction of the Jewish state, right? That the 1974 so-called plan of stages or phases or whatever it was called never really was withdrawn as the fundamental Palestinian ambition, which is why the so-called right of return has always been at the center of a centerpiece of Palestinian politics. Why they've consistently elected leaders who don't seem prepared sincerely to make peace with not only their Jewish neighbors but with their Arab neighbors as well. So as a Palestinian state, essentially for doing what Hamas is doing now, which is using its territory as a base to wage war against Israel, or as a Palestinian state for the improvement of the lives of the Palestinian people. That's what's central, and this is what drives me crazy about some of my progressive critics, and certainly your progressive critics as well, who claim to be pro-Palestinian but are always incredibly silent when it comes to the depredations of Hamas, when it comes to the fact that Mahmoud is in the 15th year of his elected four-year term of office, when it comes to a culture, never mind of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, but also a culture of misogyny and domestic repression. They're silent on these points, and we need to start speaking up in a genuine sense for the Palestinian people. And I gather that's what you're kind of talking about when you talk about the economic improvement of the Palestinian people, talking directly to Palestinians themselves and not so-called leaders who claim to speak in their name. That's the leadership, that's the kind of the difference that America could make now.
Okay, so this is fascinating. I did not expect to hear this tonight. So Bret, you yourself just said, you are often criticized by conservatives for being a never-Trumper. You're actually saying that your issue with the Trump administration's approach to the Middle East is that the president has not been forceful enough in articulating, or condemning, I should say, Palestinian sins, if I may refer to them as that, genocidal ambition, genocidal intent, using land like Gaza as a springboard for terrorist attacks. You want to hear the president give a forceful declaration. This is what we find utterly unacceptable in Palestinian aspirations, and if it does not change, there will never be peace, and there will be no American support. And you feel the president hasn't done that. Just to add to that for a second, I thought that President Trump did not get enough credit, if I may say so, when he turned down Kim Jong-un at the second summit, because he could have eased sanctions a little bit and gotten a lot of credit for having made progress instead of it being a wasted summit or a failed summit. Instead, he said, without unconditional denuclearization, there will not be any easing of the sanctions. And Kim Jong-un went nuts and maybe even assassinated most of his negotiators 2 weeks ago. But that was a very strong statement on the part of the president that without full denuclearization, there will not be any easing of sanctions. So you want to see something similar when it comes to the Middle East?
Sorry, hang on a second, okay. I'm sorry I'm going to say this, Jason. I think the president's policy towards North Korea is a disgrace. I think saying that he accepts Kim Jong-un's word that he knew that Kim knew nothing about the murder of Otto Warmbier is a disgrace. Otto Warmbier is an American citizen who was murdered by the Kim regime. I think saying that he exchanges beautiful love letters with Kim Jong-un, who's the most repressive dictator in the world, is a disgrace. I think it was an epic mistake to go and dignify someone like Kim with not one, but with two summits. I think it is very unfortunate and extremely dangerous that we are downgrading our military relations with our oldest and one of our most reliable democratic allies in the region, South Korea, by way of apparently appeasing the Kim regime. And maybe the president is conducting some form of four-dimensional chess. I don't know. Maybe he's the Garry Kasparov I've never met. But I think that the North Korea policy is one of the reasons why, sorry, I'm not on the Trump train. I could name many other reasons. But since we're here to talk about the Middle East, it used to be the case that the presidents would give set piece speeches on separate occasions of matters of great national importance that related to some foreign policy issue or another. President Obama did it on a number of occasions with respect to the Middle East after the beginning of the so-called Arab Spring. That speech doesn't look too good these days. President Bush did it in 2002 when he talked about matching democracy with progress for Palestinians, 2002 or 2003. I can't quite remember the date. Other presidents have done it. Trump has been an unusual president in that, to the extent that he has acted, it's always been by way of signing an executive order or something that was not publicly done. It wasn't an act of presidential speech making and agenda setting. And that's I think a missing dimension of this presidency. It's one of the many ways in which this presidency is just not like a traditional American presidency. It would be a great thing, and if it's not going to be President Trump, it should be Mike Pompeo or another, senior-most member of the cabinet, delivering these points, an American vision for what peace would look like. But by the way, let me say this: at the end of the day, America's agenda, the threats that the United States faces, whether it's from Russia or China or Iran or still potent elements of Sunni jihadist terrorism, all of those rank more highly than whether there's going to be a Palestinian state or not. And it's not the worst thing, and here, by the way, this one area where I'm sort of in sympathy with the administration, it's not the worst thing to just downgrade this thing and put it in the kind of, see it in the dimensions in which it properly belongs. There's a human catastrophe taking place not far from Israel in the province of Idlib. Let's worry more about that than whether Mahmoud Abbas is satisfied with this or that detail of the Trump administration's peace plan.
So I think you're absolutely right. One of the things we've done is shrink this conflict to its proper size in the context of the rest of the Middle East. You refer to the Middle East a lot. What we're speaking about specifically now is the Israel-Palestinian issue. Does it relate to the region? Of course, we want the regional support, but it is one conflict of many. It is a much smaller conflict. I don't want to diminish the Palestinians or the Israelis, and certainly the terrorist acts that have murdered so many Israelis over the years and things like that, but it is not the most important thing in the region right now. Perhaps it was years ago, and we have to make sure people understand that. The other thing...
So that means it's not the ultimate deal?
I don't use that phrase. It is a deal that we would love to make for the benefit of Israelis, for the benefit of Palestinians, for the benefit of the region itself, but it is one thing that has to be fixed in a region. People used to always say, oh, this is the core conflict of the region. Maybe that was true decades ago. It is not the core conflict of the region. If we're lucky enough to solve it, you will still have the tragedy in Syria, you will still have Yemen, you'll still have so many other things. And let's not forget the most important problem right now, which is Iran, which threatens everybody. Israelis, Saudi, UAE, and of course Palestinians. I mean, Palestinians are just as much in danger as Israel is when it comes to Iran.
And America.
And America. The other thing that I would say, Brett, and perhaps mine is the most frequent voice on it, although David is probably with me on this, but from the president down, I don't think you've seen an administration that consistently condemns just about every terrorist attack. I think our messaging on Gaza is not only worlds away from where other administrations were, but it's certainly worlds away from where the rest of the world is. You know, when there are attacks on Gaza, of course I feel terrible for the Palestinians that are dying there. Stop bringing your people to the fence. Stop throwing civilians towards the fence and make them, put them in harm's way to do that to Israel. What would any country do? What would any neighbor do if people are attacking you? So I think that the rest of the world is upset with us for siding by Israel when it defends itself on the Gaza border, but I don't think anyone has been as vocal as this administration, all of us, in terms of Israel's right to defend itself.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you're actually in agreement on many things. I mean, Brett, one might even say that the reason the president didn't give a speech like that is in order not to magnify this as the be-all and end-all in the Middle East. He has certainly given speeches like that about Iran. And Iran is the great threat. And you both seem to agree that Iran is a greater threat than the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I know Israel certainly feels that way, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been articulating that. Prime Minister Netanyahu risked his relationship with President Obama to give a speech about Iran that the president didn't want to hear in 2015. Okay, let's move on now to what...
Just one thing, because you mentioned the word speech. I guess, Brad, what would be interesting, and I haven't looked at this in 2 years, the president did give what I thought then was an amazing speech in Riyadh when he went to visit Riyadh. It might be worth you and I looking at it again. Was that the speech? Because that's sort of the speech for the region, the battle between good and evil, that type of speech. But to do it now for this conflict until we're ready to launch, and when we're ready to launch, I think what you're saying makes absolute sense. I don't think it's the time to do it until then, but I think he might have given that speech in Riyadh in May of 17.
Okay. Which was a strong condemnation of funding terrorism, etc. Okay, so let's...
I praised that speech, by the way.
Is that one of the columns people read? They all read your columns, Brett.
We need a new column like that.
You know, what happens is when I write columns that say something nice about the administration, only the left reads it. And when I write columns condemning the administration, only the right reads it. So,
Well, at least in me, you have someone that reads both. Okay? So let's move now to one of the things that Brett has been repeatedly referencing, a Palestinian state. Jason, I think one of the issues of unease in people who follow in the pro-Israel camp and pro-Palestinian camp, people who follow this closely, is that we know nothing about this plan. And the plan has been talked about for at least 2 years, maybe longer, and we still know almost nothing about the plan. It has famously been remarked that this is the only thing the administration that has not leaked. And I really don't know how many people know what the plan is. Is it 10? Is it, I don't know, 20? It's a small number of people. That's what's reported. But it leads to all this confusion. Brett keeps on mentioning that he'd be opposed to a Palestinian state unless that Palestinian state is like Costa Rica. I think for the evangelical community, which formed the core political support of the president, even if it was like Costa Rica, they'd be opposed to a Palestinian state because their opposition is biblical as opposed to just security. The Lubavitcher Rabbi, whose photo sits behind us and was my teacher and mentor, was opposed to any kind of territorial concessions and predicted with the Camp David Accords of 1978 and 79 that it would lead to increase in terrorism, de-legitimization of Israel, and it would lead to an insatiable and unquenchable international desire for Israeli territory. And all three seem to happen. So you will reveal what you wish to reveal. You will not disclose what you don't want to disclose. But is Bret correct? Is there a Palestinian? Because Bret keeps on bringing up a Palestinian state. Is there a Palestinian state in this, or is that just not even something that should be discussed? Because you seem to be really objecting to a plan based on some kind of Palestinian sovereignty. And I should also just mention, finally, if you don't mind, since you said it earlier today, I saw it on the news, and now you mentioned it again, Jason, that this plan may be pushed up now to November 6th because of the early elections, which are September 17th. The president right now has 22, 25 Democratic opponents. He's in the fight of his life. And how much time is he going to have to give to this? And how many evangelical supporters can he really alienate? I saw a poll that said that the two biggest issues for evangelical voters today is, number one is life and abortion, but a close second is Israel's security, which is astonishing, and not giving back land, which for them is an absolute biblical mandate. So is there a Palestinian state? Do you want to mention anything about that? And how does the president navigate this on November 6th when we're going to be talking all 2020 all the time?
On the evangelical note, I think that Israel has tremendous friends in the evangelical community. I mean, it's really amazing their support for the state of Israel. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I encourage you to get familiar with it. They're terrific when it comes to the state of Israel, its security, and other things as well. On the state, I'll tell you, people get upset on the left with us and others for not using the phrase two-state solution. We chose not to use it from early on because it means different things to different people. The word state means something, as Bret described, is not the state that Saab Erekat would say it means, and it's not the state that evangelicals say it means. So we've completely stayed away from the labels. I'm not going to answer what is in the plan, but I will tell you that it only harms the prospects of peace for people to throw that label around. A lot of naive people think if you use the phrase and you sprinkle some fairy dust on this thing, something will grow out of it that'll be helpful. That's not the case. What we think we've created is something that protects Israel, allows Israel to continue to thrive, allows the Palestinians to create something that they can be proud of. One of the ironic things is that when the Palestinians in my office tell me after the meetings not to tweet it, I say to them, do you realize that what we're trying to create for you is something that you could leave my office and say, here's what I told Greenblatt. I said I was against this, but I said I love that. You can't do that right now. We're trying to help you do that. And they acknowledge that that's the unfortunate case in the lives that they live right now. And it goes back to your other question about, is it realistic that if we touch the Palestinian people and they desire what we can give them or what we try to give them or what Israel might be willing to give them, will that work? And the answer is, I don't know. The other thing I want to talk about is this demilitarized state. One of the talking points. Oh, it'll be a demilitarized state. That's only one issue of Israel's risk. Israel's risk today comes from terror tunnels, from rockets being fired at Israel, and it's from bad actors in a territory like Gaza, as Bret mentioned. So even the phrase demilitarized state that is thrown around as if, oh, demilitarized state, Israel has no worries. Israel has a lot of worries, even with something that's labeled a demilitarized state. So the short answer to your question is what we think has been developed, we hope is a realistic, implementable deal that both sides will have to compromise on, but may decide to embrace. We think it is probably the only deal that really works for both sides, but it is not going to hew to the talking points of the past.
November 6th, that means the entire plan will be published. We'll know it in all its detail. It'll be like the Mueller report that kind of just comes out.
Ouch.
Okay, bad comparison. I take that back. It'll be like, give me something that comes out all at once, as opposed to piecemeal. Can someone help me with that? What just like drops?
A baby.
A baby. Okay. Well, this will be your baby. You've worked on it for
Prime
quite some
Minister
time.
Steyer, the new PA Prime Minister, one of the first things he said when he was sworn in is that the baby will be born dead. What a terrible thing to say about the
God
plan,
forbid. We
right?
hope this is going to be a living baby. But November 6th, we will know the plan, or will it still be piecemeal?
I wouldn't even say November 6th. After Bahrain, we're going to focus on when do we release it, do we delay it? But it is certainly a possibility. Will you know it all at once? I learned in this business months, maybe 2 years ago, never to make predictions about it. I didn't think I'd be sitting here today not having revealed the plan yet, so no point in giving a prediction.
Okay, Brett, you follow the American political scene very closely. Given the president's strong evangelical base and their opposition to any kind of territorial concessions, given Netanyahu, who couldn't even deliver a government, the idea of him being able to, if he wins the elections, delivering a government that can make territorial concessions seems far-fetched to me right now. And then you have the Palestinians who won't even speak to the United States government right now. And even if the Palestinians did speak to the United States government, Jason has shown tremendous courage in condemning the Hamas wing of the Palestinian of the Palestinian leadership because they're terrorists, and the United States labels them terrorists. What prospects are there for peace at all, given this is so complicated? It's astonishing. And then on top of that, Israel doesn't have a government. Israel's not going to have a government until like Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. It's unbelievable. Even President Trump said, like, what the heck's going on? What kind of political instability is this? How realistic is all this?
I mean, my own view is that there's zero chance of any of this materializing. But you know, there's an old Led Zeppelin song that is, what is and what should never be. And what we need to do is sort of flip that to, what should be but isn't. I mean, there needs to be a kind of a conversation about what an ideal end state is, with the understanding that we might not reach that end state in 10 or 50 or even 100 years. Now, you were putting words in my mouth just a moment ago. I'm in favor of a two-state solution, okay? I don't think...
You would like to see a Palestinian state?
Yes, if it's like Costa Rica, okay? This is just the point, which is to say, if it's a state that is small, progressive, democratic, genuinely demilitarized, genuinely capable and willing to live in peace with its neighbors and contribute to the betterment of everyone, there's no reason why that can't at least be the aspiration. There's no reason we should condemn Palestinians to what George W. Bush used to call the soft bigotry of low expectations, which is they're going to have a state, even if it's a kleptocracy, even if it's a theocracy, et cetera, et cetera. We shouldn't say that. We should say we want a high-quality state. And this is what has to happen in order for a high-quality state to emerge. And what has to happen isn't simply a territorial demarcation or even a diplomatic agreement. What has to happen is a fundamental different set of aspirations on the part of Palestinian leaders now and in the future that brings their people along to a vision of the sort that Jews of the Yishuv had back in the 1930s and 1940s when they were thinking about what a state should look like. So what I think is realistic is to simply say, and not just the Trump administration, but every responsible world leader, this is what we want. If you don't want to have it, the Israelis are getting along quite fine. The rest of the world is very busy. We've got other business to attend to. That's the deal. I remember to flip something James Baker once said back in 1991 or 1992. He said, 202, whatever the number of the White House is, give us a call when you're ready for peace. Except he was doing that to the Shamir government. You should do that to the Abbas government and simply say, give us a call when you're ready for peace. We've got other fish to fry. You're not the most important people in the world. Sorry. Bye.
But again, very little I would change for what you said, including the 202 number. I actually use that reference a lot. After we did the Jerusalem announcement and all the other announcements, word kept coming back. If you only say this, if you only do that, if you only do this, we'll come back to the table. The answer is we're not going to do that. We're not going to pay you to come back to the table. We will release a vision that if it makes sense, will either get traction or won't get traction. And you'll either call us or you're not going to call us. We subscribe to that philosophy. The chances, it's a tough thing. I'll address what Secretary Pompeo said to the Conference of Presidents. I'll say what I said yesterday at the J-Post event. Shame on the person who leaked on Secretary of State Pompeo. It was an off-the-record conversation. How dare they breach that confidence? But the words are out. what he said, I would agree with. These are tough, complex problems. We don't pretend that they're not, but I would say history will judge us if in this unique period of time, with Iran being the threat to the region, with Israel having ties to the Arabs, that in 2.25 years you've seen tremendous strides alone, with people just sick and tired of the conflict. History will judge us if we don't try, even if, I won't put my percentage on it, but even if Bret was right.
Okay. Moving along. One of the things that has made news yesterday, I believe, Jason, you said, as I mentioned at the beginning, you reinforced the words of Ambassador David Friedman that Israel has a right to annex. Did you not say that? So correct.
He said retain.
Retain, okay. That Israel has a right to retain West Bank settlements, or some people refer to it as communities in Judea and Samaria, the ancient biblical lands of Judea and Samaria. So let's talk about that for a moment. I respectfully disagree with my very dear friend Bret Stephens. I'm opposed to a Palestinian state because even if it were like Costa Rica, and by the way, I'm not sure that Costa Rica doesn't have an army. Aren't they militarized? They have no army? That's amazing. Why don't we all live in Costa Rica? That's so pretty. I saw real red parrots flying all around at Corcovado National Park. So
That was the Army.
Air Force.
I just don't, I'm not even sure there's enough land for the creation of a Palestinian state. We did this ad in the New York Times, a newspaper well known to my friend Bret. This was an ad that we did in the New York Times 10 days ago, full page ad. Rashida Tlaib had spoken of, we wanted to be fair to her, she kept on saying she was misquoted, so rarely do you see this. We put the entire quotation is about how we celebrated the Holocaust and the calming feeling the Holocaust gives. We put the entire quote, so she could not say that we quoted her out of context. One of the main things we wanted to show was that when she mentioned that the Jews had been welcomed to British-mandated Palestine, we showed precisely the opposite was true. It was pogroms, it was mass murder, it was riots that caused Britain, and even a friend like Winston Churchill, and one of the best columns you wrote this year was that review of Andrew Roberts' book on Churchill. Even a great Zionist like Churchill to close the gates of Palestine because of all the Arab pressure. So we showed all that. But the point is, this was Israel. This is what it was supposed to be, the Jewish homeland, under Churchill 1921 as colonial secretary. Then it shrinks down to this, and then the 1947 UN partition agreement, Israel's, the Jewish homeland is very tiny. So I'm not even sure that there's room for a Palestinian state that wouldn't lead to some kind of conflict. I understand that Singapore is small, I understand, but even so, but regardless, there are 400,000 Jewish residents in Judea and Samaria today. And you have said repeatedly that this administration wants to be realistic about the facts on the ground. And what's realistic is 400,000 people, that's an enormous amount. Why not say that Israel can annex these areas if we're going to be open about truth? I mean, Bret, you're saying over and over again that we have to be realistic. The possibilities of moving 400,000 people are extremely remote. This is even like Gaza, where Jewish communities were forcibly removed, and that turned out very poorly. There have been 3 wars and nonstop aggression and tens of thousands of missiles fired ever since. I visited those communities in Gush Katif before they were evacuated forcibly by the IDF. Why not use words like annex? In fact, I find this administration is, in my opinion, and I don't say this to receive any applause or to make Jason feel more comfortable here, even as I'm so grateful that he's here tonight, but this, in my opinion, is the most pro-Israel administration in American history. I think this is an administration that has shown courage for Israel's security, Israel's legitimacy, that is unprecedented, that has exceeded all of my expectations. Everything the president has done at the UN, the Iran deal. I mean, half the ads around this room were against the Iran deal. The Iran deal, I love America. I'm a proud American. I couldn't believe we were legitimizing this genocidal government that is sworn to a second Holocaust of the Jewish people, as articulated so eloquently by the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, in a speech that I was present for in a room not much bigger than this one in Warsaw in February. We were there together. So you've been so forceful on Israel's security, and it's not about choosing sides. If Israel was wrong about these issues, I as a Jew would say that Israel's wrong. I've said Israel's wrong on many issues. Israel's wrong about not recognizing the Armenian genocide. Israel's absolutely wrong. That's a terrible policy. To appease a dictator, an autocrat named Erdogan, we're not recognizing the genocide of the Armenians when we are a people who have experienced a genocide. I love Israel. It doesn't mean that Israel is right about everything. But the administration has been very forceful about pointing out when Israel is right about things like the Golan Heights, when Israel is right about Jerusalem being Israel's ancient capital. Why not say that Israel can annex these things, these communities, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said just before the election, to give a greater prospect for peace by being specific about facts on the ground?
Here's what I would say we have said, and I would refer you not only to David's comments in the New York Times article, and again, David's comments, not what people distorted David's comments to be. I'd refer you to the op-ed that David and Secretary Pompeo wrote for the Wall Street Journal after the Golan announcement. It was a pretty recent op-ed, maybe a month ago, that'll shed some light on that. I will refer you to what the President has said, what I've said. I think David has said this as well. I said this at the UN Security Council only a couple of weeks ago. Blaming the settlements for the conflict and this constant focus on settlements is a farce. The lack of peace has nothing to do with the existence of settlements, no matter what people say, day in and day out. And the other thing I would point out is 242, well, first of all, we were left with a terrible resolution when the Obama administration left. Just weeks before the president was inaugurated, we were left with this terrible resolution. But 242, I think any intellectually honest person has to believe that it is interpreted differently by different people. For people to suggest that 242 requires an absolute withdrawal to the 67 lines, which is the interpretation or the talking point of Saeb Erekat, that is not what 242 says, and people ought to be taking a closer look at 242. Beyond that, I'll end, and we can have a private conversation about your other question.
Brett, do you want to talk about the settlements and the possibility? Prime Minister Netanyahu promised to annex the settlements. He didn't say which ones. I think he said settlement blocks. Now he's also in the political fight for his life. What happens with these Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria?
Well, look, I agree with what Jason said. If settlements were the core of the conflict, then the withdrawal and dismantling of settlements from Gaza in 2005 would have created more peace, not so much less. So it's just simply a kind of a nonsense statement to claim they're the core of the conflict. Secondly, the idea that integral neighborhoods of Jerusalem, which are over the armistice line of 1949, the so-called Green Line, constitute some insuperable obstacle to peace or should not form an integral part of Israel in any future settlement of conflict, I think is wrong and unrealistic and foolish. Thirdly, I think Jason is right that Resolution 242 from 1967 was very carefully written by Arthur Goldberg, Johnson's UN ambassador, to talk about return of territories, not the territories, and that's a very significant distinction. So the idea that Israel has no right whatsoever to any territories over the Green Line, I think, is simply a misreading of history, a misreading of the legal basis, or the original resolutions, and a kind of a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. Of course, French Hill is going to be part of Israel after any kind of resolution. Of course, Malay Adumim is going to be part of Israel. Of course, the old quarter of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, is going to be a part of it. I don't think Jerusalem should ever be divided, quite frankly. I think it's an insane proposition. Is also a mistake. I can think of all kinds of small countries which have been able to do a great deal by relying on the ingenuity of their own people rather than looking for natural resources or whatever. And until recently, Hong Kong was an example of that. Singapore is a terrific example of that. There are all sorts of little countries in Europe that are doing just fine, thank you, because they're not committed to warring on their neighbors. They're committed to using human capital for the betterment of their people. And that's what's going to happen at some point or other with the Palestinians, whether they get the memo tomorrow or, long after we're all gone. I don't know.
And you wrote an article at the Wall Street Journal saying that Israel was a great example of that, if you remember that article.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, this is why I've always had a kind of mixed feelings about Israel's discovery of natural gas and these mineral resources that it never had, because, countries that discover mineral wealth tend to go down the drain. I mean, this is the so-called oil curse, or the energy curse. Fortunately, I don't think Israel's economy is going to be sustained by natural gas alone. So it'll have to rely on high tech and everything else the country's doing to improve itself.
Okay, we have two more issues to discuss. Here's the first, Jason. This president was accused by many, and still is accused by many, of being an Islamophobe. Rashida Tlaib, Ilan Omar, people who aren't exactly great friends of Israel, have really gone after him. So, surprise, surprise, he has a better relationship with the Gulf states, with most Arab countries, than President Obama did. When President Obama wanted to meet the leaders of the Gulf states about the Iran deal, they sent their foreign ministers. They actually insulted the President of the United States. They didn't even come to his meeting at Camp David. The President made his first visit to Saudi Arabia. I just read recently they spent like $60 million on the visit. I mean, he was welcomed warmly. President Trump seems to enjoy a very strong relationship with the Gulf states. And a unique achievement of this administration is to see their about face on the Gulf states' about face on Israel, I guess largely because they have come to understand that if you want a good relationship with the United States in general, and the Trump administration in particular, you have to have a good relationship with Israel. That they're not going to really brook constant insults to Israel. That's a phenomenal achievement. Why isn't that the Trump peace plan? Why isn't that the focus? Why isn't the focus specifically on Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Oman and Bahrain and Qatar and Egypt and well, Syria is a humanitarian disaster, but that's a phenomenal achievement. If these countries were to make peace with Israel, I mean, even if Israel were to open any kind of office whatsoever in Saudi Arabia, an economic office, a tourism office, this would be earth-shattering. Why not put the focus there where there seems to be more progress to be made, largely because they do feel that Iran is, I guess, the biggest danger, or for other reasons they want to, as Bret just said, the curse of oil wealth means they want to decentralize their economies, they want to make them less oil dependent, they want greater openings to the West. And why isn't that the Trump peace plan? It would seem to me that even if you're speaking in terms of things like a Nobel Peace Prize, if President Trump were to create some kind of relationship between Israel and the major Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, which is still seen as the leader of the Arab world, not only because of its oil production, but because of Mecca and Medina, that would be Nobel Peace Prize grade. Why isn't that the focus?
I wouldn't say it's not a focus. We've spent a lot of time over 240 years developing that relationship between Israel and its neighbors. We don't take credit alone. Prime Minister of Israel has been very, very active on that. And each of the leaders in the region gets a tremendous amount of credit. You've seen barriers shattered over 225 years, but these are not barriers that can be shattered dramatically over such a short period of time. You're talking about a conflict that is really more than 70 years old, right? Each country has it's in its national interest to have ties with Israel and to have a relationship with Israel, but they have other issues as well. So we are not pushing anybody to do anything that they're not comfortable with. They're leaning forward in a way that they are comfortable with. We hope that they're going to continue to lean forward, but us pushing them is no different than us pushing Israel or the Palestinians to reach a peace deal. Everyone's going to have to decide for themselves what makes sense. What we do is encourage. We give them a lot of reasons why they should do things, but they have to make their own decision. We don't want to cause more problems. We want a creeping positive movement, not a dramatic thing that upsets things in a way that can't be pulled back from.
I would just add that I actually think President Obama deserved the Nobel because remarkably, the way in which he united the Sunni states with Israel in emphatic vocal opposition and horror to his Iran outreach actually created the basis for this rapprochement that nobody expected. So, I mean, maybe not in 2009, but certainly in 2015 or 16, he'd earned it.
Jason, is that so? But why not invite Israel to the Bahrain workshop?
Our goal isn't a political statement. Oh wow, we got Israel and the Palestinian leadership. And certainly not them because they boycotted it, but that we got everybody in the room together. Right? Our goal is to show this economic vision that the administration has worked very hard on. Get feedback from both donor countries to the extent they might be willing to donate down the road, because we're not asking for pledges at the moment. Feedback from experts who know these types of projects, and that's really the most important thing. We're not looking just for a photo op, if you will. It's much more substantial than that.
So is it because Israel would not be one of the donor countries?
Israel is neither a donor country nor the beneficiary of the projects. The Palestinians are going to benefit from it, Jordan and Egypt. Israel certainly has a lot of expertise to give these projects, but we could get to that down the road. And in the first unveil, we don't want to politicize it. If the Palestinian Authority was willing to come, of course we would invite Israel. I mean, that both in the room could only be positive. Palestinian Authority, to the tremendous detriment of its people, chose to boycott it. We don't want to politicize something that has other positive reasons to still go forward with.
Because as recently as yesterday, it sounded like from Yisrael Katz, Israeli farmers, said that Israel was expecting to be invited and send someone. But
so I saw his quote in the paper. I didn't get a chance to watch the video. Israeli business people are invited to and will be at the event. I don't know if Minister Katz meant the government of Israel or business people. I think he said Israelis or Israel. Could be interpreted both ways. I saw him Friday, not yesterday, so I couldn't ask him what he meant. But Israel business people who can lend to the conversation will be represented at the conference, at the workshop.
okay. So here's my final question, and I'll start with Bret on this, and Jason, you'll tell us to what extent you want to participate, because it's a political question. Bret, this is going to be, I think, an election like no other. I've never seen this many Democratic candidates running against a Republican incumbent. Is it June 21st or the 26th when the Democratic debates begin? 27. Okay, and it's going to be everyone expects a ferocious campaign season. It's already started, but by the time we hit September, the Israeli elections, or November 6th, the date that Jason is giving us, I mean, President Trump really is in the political fight of his life. He's not popular among Democrats. I thought that I was trying to get one chuckle tonight. Thank you very much. They're even speaking about impeaching him. I saw yesterday, I think the numbers are 24% want to see impeachment, that the majority don't want to see impeachment, they just want to see an election. How realistic is it for the president to be involved in this kind of negotiation? It will kind of take, you've been mentioning that the president has to be more engaged, he has to make more statements, he has to give a speech. But you've also kind of said this should be small fry for him. There's North Korea, there's Iran, there's like really big stuff. This is the political fight of his life. How realistic is this peace plan given the campaign season is going to be so dominant over the next, certainly after the summer, by the time we go, post Labor Day?
All I'm saying is Trump should give a speech and then just go do whatever he's going to do. Enjoy executive time or whatever the president does. Look, obviously it's a political season, and he's going to be involved in campaigning. If I had to place a modest bet, I would assume that he's going to be reelected. I don't see a Democrat who's capable of beating him right now, with the possible exception of Pete Buttigieg.
Have you said that publicly before?
Yeah, I think so.
No, I should say no. We made news tonight.
Was that an endorsement?
No, I mean, I'm just saying that the only candidate I see among the Democrats who has the chops, I'm making a political assessment, I'm not making an endorsement, is Mayor Pete, who could do it. But look, you've got 3.6% unemployment, and we're not in significant wars. Presidents who do that typically win. So that's what I expect is going to happen. which should allow him maybe to have a little more time to actually devote to making at least a few serious foreign policy statements. That being said, right now it looks to me like the biggest issue that the president is going to confront from a foreign policy perspective over the next several months is going to be the crisis with Iran, because I think this crisis is going to grow much graver and more serious.
Do you see a war coming?
Well, in my column on Saturday, I said that if the Iranians continue to conduct what appear to be acts of piracy in international waters, the first thing that the administration should do is change rules of engagement so that the Navy can engage not only Iranians that are harassing U.S. ships, but that are threatening international commercial ships as well. If the Iranians want to abide by that, I think we should restrict the Iranian Navy to its ports, and if they don't abide by that, I think we should sink the Iranian Navy in its ports.
Wow. Do you think we should put American flags on the tankers?
I'd have to think it through, and we'll see. But look, the main issue here, though, is we have to make sure that Iran does not get anywhere within 100 miles of being able to rapidly acquire a nuclear capability. And unfortunately, by the way, one of the reasons people said, oh, the JCPOA guarantees that Iran is going to be at least a year from making a bomb. And all of a sudden, they're just, months from making a bomb. What happened to that JCPOA promise of a year from making a bomb? But what the administration has to do is apply consistent, realistic pressure on Iran that is so punitive, and it maintains that pressure, that the Iranians return for a negotiation which yields a deal, because I'm not in favor of a war with Iran, it yields a deal that meets basic expectations, that we have genuine knowledge of what Iran has done, what Iran can do. We have immediate inspection rights, no notice inspections on any site in Iran, and we have a permanent dismantlement rather than sort of a temporary freeze on facilities like Fordo, Isfahan, and so on. And by the way, a complete ban on Iranian testing of ballistic missiles. And that's not a big ask. What I've said before is what the deal that if I were in the administration, I would suggest to the president is what I call normalization for normalization. We're prepared to have a normal economic relations, complete lifting of sanctions, resumption of diplomatic relations, if Iran is prepared to behave like a normal state, not only having no access to a nuclear fuel cycle, but an end to their campaign of terror and destabilization throughout the Middle East. Not a big ask, right? Most other countries aren't going around trying to blow up container ships on the high seas.
You're asking the leopard not to be a leopard. You're asking them to change their essential nature. Well, that's one of the issues I have about the whole Palestinian state. I'm not sure that the Costa Rica thing is really going to happen, in our lifetime. But be that as it may, we do have to aspire to peace.
Wait, just let me make one point there, okay? Do not subject the Palestinian people to the soft bigotry of low expectations. I said that before. We should not simply dismiss this as a possibility. We've seen other states dramatically change their outlook and their aspirations, okay, in ways that are quite astonishing. And we should simply set an expectation, just as you set expectations for all kinds of situations. If you want a state, this is what you got to do. Okay, bye.
Yeah, but Brett, this transcends the scope of this conversation. Only for me to respond by saying, we have seen dramatic change, Japan, Germany. It was usually after some cataclysmic event. We rarely see that kind of evolutionary change in one generation or two generations. I last week, 4 days ago, I was in Bastogne, writing about the Battle of the Bulge. I was at D-Day 75, one of the most moving experiences of my life. These countries changed after some cataclysmic event. And there was regime change. The people running these countries did not continue. There was always some kind of change. You said you have a problem with President Trump speaking to Kim Jong-un. We can debate that because I would at least say he's made no concessions. Meeting him, okay, it is uncomfortable seeing a dictator legitimized, but he made no concessions. The president did not remove any of the sanctions.
We're not having major military exercises with South Korea. We suspended that.
Okay. as you said, I don't want, because Jason's here, I don't want to veer from the subject. Let me give the final, and this just shows we have to have more of these conversations. Thank you very much. Let me just give Jason the final question here, and then I'm going to do a short concluding remarks, and I'm going to thank everyone for coming. This
Can
is
I just
Jason.
respond
Yes, please.
to,
Of course,
sorry.
please. Yeah.
So first of all, I agree with Brett that the focus is Iran. Iran is a threat to our allies in the Middle East, ourselves, the Europeans, no matter if people disagree with the president's approach in Europe. They're a significant threat, and that has to be the absolute focus. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, resolving it, it's a hope, a dream, an aspiration. But to get to your point about doing it during an election cycle, if Brett is right and it's 0%, we'll know that quickly, and then we don't have to worry about your question. It's sort of a moot question if he's right. If he's wrong, though, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but if he's wrong, I look at things as a dad. I have 6 kids, ages 8 to 20. I would hate to tell these Palestinians that I speak to all the time that they have to wait, that their dreams have to wait. Because if we could actually help them achieve their dreams, even during an election cycle, I think we owe it to them to do that. So we'll find out pretty quickly, and then we'll see. But I think that this president has a unique ability to handle complex tasks at the same time, with a very strong national security team, very strong leader in Secretary Pompeo, lots of very talented and smart people in the administration who can help us get through this if we're lucky enough to get there.
So you see the president being fully engaged in this peace process and this peace plan, even in the midst of a turbulent election cycle?
If it gets off the ground, meaning we may not get off the ground. Again, I'm not challenging Brett 0%, but if we're lucky enough to get off the ground, I think everybody deserves us moving it forward.
Jason, can I just ask you also finally, the night before the election at the candlelit, ball, that's I believe that's when the president began to use the expression "ultimate deal." I may be wrong, but he certainly used it then. Yankee would know. Is that right? Did he use it the night? Was that the night he used it? Anyway, ultimate deal, because you guys are writing about the ultimate deal all the time. It sounds to me, and maybe I didn't hear correctly tonight, that maybe it's been downgraded in his priorities over the past 3 years. That what he saw at the beginning of his administration as no one can pull this off, I'm a great deal maker, I'm a businessman, I'm approaching the presidency from a new perspective, that not that of a career politician, but as a businessman. And as a businessman, this is the ultimate deal. Maybe it's been downgraded in his estimation. Maybe Iran is a far bigger deal. Maybe Israel and Saudi Arabia is a far bigger deal. Maybe North Korea is a far bigger deal. You have the presidency, or you know the president for more than 2 decades. Is this still the ultimate deal to him?
I think what was unique about the president during the campaign, and remains so, is that he is a huge Israel supporter, has been proven. But he also wants to try to help the Palestinian people. But he's also, as a deal maker, realistic. And if he doesn't think a deal can be achieved, he isn't going to keep chasing it, especially when he has other more important things to attend to. So does he still want to try to do it? Absolutely. But will he continue to do it in a way that makes no sense for us or for Israel or for the Palestinians because we can't get traction or sustain traction? No, I don't think he would continue just beating his head against the wall to try to push forth a deal that can't happen. We just don't know the answer yet.
It's kind of like building a tower in Moscow.
Okay, Brett. Brett, I'm actually giving you the last question. Last question. So what I meant to say before was your belief that we can create a Palestinian state like Costa Rica. The reason I feel that's unrealistic, and you said we've seen other states achieve that, is it was my point was I wasn't clear. It was only when militarism was completely defeated. That's what I meant by a cataclysmic event. It was when the military option was closed that the countries went in a different direction. The colossal military defeat of Japan is what made them look at ways to develop that were not militaristic. Germany was the same. These were colossal military defeats. Militarism, Prussia had this great militaristic tradition, and then it was eviscerated by far stronger powers. And then Germany became the dominant country again in Europe, but this time through building cars and heavy industry, et cetera, et cetera. And your wife is giving a very important speech. Is it tomorrow? Because your father-in-law was imprisoned by
Hitler.
Yeah. Very important. So I hope that we can read that, God willing. It was only after that happened. But the problem with all the Israeli-Palestinian wars, when we wish there were no wars, and that's why I so endorse everything Jason is doing, I completely endorse it. And I'm so grateful for your time, and not just coming here, of course, but all your efforts. You are pursuing something that is very, very hard, and you're doing it, and it's very important. But these wars are always stopped short, Brett, and the Palestinians never get the message, or Hamas never gets the message, that the military option is just is not going to happen. Israel has always stopped after 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Now, I don't want to complain about that because I have children who served in the IDF. I don't want to see any war. When you become a parent of a soldier, it changes your perspective completely. But the Palestinians still believe that the military option is the one by which to defeat Israel, which is why Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles in southern Lebanon. It's why Hamas has, we don't even know how many missiles in Gaza. They still believe that the armed struggle is the way to achieve things, as opposed to what you're trying to achieve next week, Jason, which is economics. Build Google. Build great roads. So do you not believe that something like that has to happen for them to get the message that the military option is closed forever in order for there to be a Costa Rica, which is, as a
I
Palestinian
mean, what you're
state?
saying, if I can summarize your question, is will Palestinians ever change unless you have a Hiroshima in Gaza, right?
No, I don't want to say Hiroshima. I want to be
Okay.
clear that I'm not speaking about
an
that.
epic military defeat of the
Well, a
Palestinians.
defeat where they understand that they're never going to win in a military struggle.
Well, look, let me revise.
Like the Six-Day War.
Let me revise the answer I gave about the question, your question about the chances of Jason's efforts succeeding. I don't want to say 0%. Okay, I think they're low. But you can't give up hope, and I don't think that there's anything the matter with setting out aspirations. And I think it's always a good idea to keep a sense of hope about human possibility and about generations understanding the mistakes of the generations that preceded them. And my hope is that Palestinians, younger Palestinians, will grow at some point, I don't know when, weary of the sterile politics of Arafatism and of Hamas. And there are examples all around. Many Palestinians live here in the United States, or they live abroad, or they travel to Abu Dhabi, and they must have, I'm sure they are asking themselves perfectly pragmatic questions. Why do we have to constantly live in a state of endless antagonism with our neighbors? Is there not a better way? And at some point those questions are bound to percolate. At some point they're bound to gain some kind of traction. You saw it in those brave Palestinians standing up against Hamas, not Israel, but against Hamas in recent protests. And to the extent, maybe I've been too negative, to the extent that Jason and his team are talking to those Palestinians, encouraging them, creating at some point a political base for change, for genuine renewal, for genuine progress, then I think they're doing important work, even if it doesn't yield a result in the short term. I don't think you should ever write off whole groups of people under any circumstances as saying sort of, beyond hope, irredeemable, and so on. I think it's a terrible way to approach people. I think it's morally upsetting, and I don't think it serves any good purpose at the end of the day. We should say to the Palestinians, we wish you well. Here are our expectations. We hope you meet them.
Well, I have to say, it's like we've come full circle because we're all really in agreement, right? Number one, that Jason's efforts are extremely important. We thank you for the way you represent the United States. Jason, with you. We thank you for the humility with which you go about your responsibilities. Just everyone, give me a moment, please. We thank you for your dedication. You're an Orthodox Jew, so you spend the week away from your family. Sometimes you get to go home for Shabbos. I know the sacrifices that you make on a government salary, et cetera, et cetera. And I, as an American Jew who believes in everything that Bret just articulated so eloquently about the aspirations for peace and the value and dignity of human life, et cetera, I salute your efforts. I also want you to please communicate on our behalf. We're not a political organization, we're a values organization, but you'll please communicate to the President of the United States our deep appreciation to him for his stalwart support of the world's only Jewish state, his repeated defenses of Jews amidst these terrible attacks against our people, the kind of time he dedicated, even in his State of the Union address, to condemning anti-Semitism. People mention Charlottesville. They don't mention how much the president has done since Charlottesville. Just astonishing, and how he has shown himself to be with us, with the Jewish community worldwide, in defending Jewish life, defending Jewish rights, and defending us against the anti-Semites. And what he's done for Israel really is unprecedented, and I want the president to know that it's deeply appreciated. And that's not a political statement. This is a statement of American Jews to the president of this country for everything he does for us. And thank you for being part of that administration. And Jason, thank you for your time. I'm very grateful. And to my dear friend Bret Stephens, I think you all saw tonight why Jason has been chosen to lead these negotiations, because of how disarming he is, and how it's amazing, no matter how much this is such a protracted conflict, no one has anything bad to say about Jason, even on the other side, with the exception of real extremist haters. But he's very respected in the Arab world, very respected in the Jewish world, and the Israeli world. But to my friend Bret Stephens, I want to thank you personally for the phenomenal eloquence you bring to bear on defending Israel and Israel's good name. We Jews have been terrible at two things for the past millennia. One is sports, with the exception of yours truly, and the second is public relations. We have just not found the words how to articulate our values, defend ourselves, and then God gave you this phenomenal gift, and you have deployed it so effectively in defense of your people, in the world's most respected organization. And I know that your father, who is looking down at us from heaven, and your mother, who, thank God, is with us right here on earth, I know the tremendous pride that they take in seeing a son who has risen to those kinds of heights, to take a very maligned people who've tried to do the right thing for the past few thousand years and have really been defamed. To have a defender of your caliber is such a rarity, and we all show you affection, appreciation, and tremendous respect for it. And God bless you all. Thank you all very much for coming.